You're listening to the Optimal Performance Podcast. The OPP is brought to you by Natural Stacks, makers of 100% natural and open source supplements designed to help you live optimal. For more information on how to build optimal mental and physical performance into your life, go to naturalstacks.com. Okay, everybody, before we jump into this episode of the Optimal Performance Podcast, like every episode, I like to talk a little bit about some of the products that I take that I love. And today, I'm going to talk about one that I take every single day, which is the BCAAs, and that's branched chain amino acids. I eat ketogenically, about 80-20, so most of the time I'm fasting until 2 o'clock just about every single day. And one thing that I've found that's helped me retain lean muscle mass and has helped my workouts is these branched chain amino acids. So I take this in the morning before I go to jiu-jitsu, or I'll take these before I do a kettlebell circuit at my house. And one thing that I thought was kind of cool was 2 weeks ago's episode with Brett Kelly from US Ski and Snowboard. He talked about how he was using the branched chain amino acids in combination with the biocreatine that we carry. And it brought up a key point for me in the fact that all of the stuff that Natural Stacks makes is formulated for synergy. And that's just a fancy way of these things work together. So if you're working out or you're doing intermittent fasting, taking the branched chain amino acids just gives you an extra boost, an extra bump of energy, and also helps you retain lean muscle mass where diet can't. If you have not ever purchased anything on naturalstacks.com and you're just a big fan of the podcast, check it out. There's so many awesome products, and you can use the code MAC15, MAC15, to get 15% off your first online purchase at naturalstacks.com. And if you're an intermittent faster, I would strongly suggest the natural BCAAs. Play on, players. Oh, and also, we're running a promo for our new Siltep to Go packs. Carrying around a bottle while you're traveling or at work or just doing normal life stuff can be a little bit cumbersome, so you can bring Siltep to Go pack. This is good for a little bit of energy if you're traveling. It's also, for me, it's my favorite nootropic of all time. It's reliable. It helps me stay focused when I have a lot of stuff to do, and that's most of the time, including doing this amazing podcast for you guys. And the Siltep to Go, we're doing a special offer right now. If you buy Siltep to Go on naturalstacks.com, use Siltep for all. That's the number 4 all. Siltep for all, and you'll save $10 on your purchase of Siltep to Go pack. Like I said, it's my most favorite nootropic of all time. Immediate boost in mental performance, and for me, it's really the go-to supplement when people, coaching clients of mine or friends of mine that are just sort of like lacking a little bit of energy, I always point them to Siltep, and now you can get it in a to-go pack, which is pretty sweet. In this week's episode of the Optimal Performance Podcast, we sit down with Rowena Gates, who is the co-founder of ENG3, that's ENG3, which is a biotech company that sells and creates the Nano V. The Nano V is a pretty incredible little device that is highly scientific and highly technical. And so our conversation ranges from how to use this thing, who it helps, and what the possible potential is for using the Nano V with regularity. You may have heard her on the Bulletproof podcast with Dave Asprey a little while ago. And what this machine does is it uses structured water and runs it through a little tube that actually structures the water in a way that when you breathe in these water vapors, it's immediately absorbed into your body, and it helps with protein folding. Now, for a dum-dum like me who doesn't know much about protein folding, basically it's an essential part of our ability to recover and remain vital. So the Nano V has been used by top athletes, by people who are recovering from disease or who are recovering from radiation, and you can find it in various clinics across the country. And the conversation ranges from the very specific about oxidative stress and how the NanoVi helps it, but it also gets into a little bit about complementary services and methods that you can use the NanoVi with to just live a more optimal life. And for those of you guys, I know as listeners, you're tinkering around with lots of different things, not only wearables and stuff like that, but you're always looking for the next breakthrough in performance technology, and the NanoVi is that. I've tried it a couple of times, and I'll tell you, I actually received a little bit of a boost in my energy, which has never been a problem for me, but I did receive a boost in my energy when I used it. It's highly technical and it's fascinating. And I know you're going to enjoy this episode. So thanks for tuning in. As always, there's show notes on the website. And please drop me a line. Thank you for commenting on the posts recently. You guys that have commented on the posts, I'll always respond. Send me an email, sean@naturalstacks.com. Follow me on Instagram, The Mystic Mac. And once again, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate you guys continuing to tune in. And it's my only goal to provide you with the coolest, most interesting topics for the Optimal Performance Podcast. Enjoy. You're listening to the Optimal Performance Podcast, and I'm your host, Sean McCormick. It's the OPP. I'm a performance coach, a wellness entrepreneur, a blogger, a speaker, a biohacker, and it's my privilege to bring to you the leading experts in the field of performance. So let's dig right in. And we're here with Rowena Gates from Eng3. Rowena, thanks for joining us.
Hey, it's a pleasure. Good to be here.
So we're going to dig into so much science and so much performance, but before we dig into any of that, I like to start each of these podcasts the same way, which is to ask each guest what they have in their body for today. So today it's 9:30 on a Monday morning in Pacific Standard Time. What have you eaten? What sort of supplements, coffees? What's in your body right now, Rowena?
Not much. I've had a small cup of coffee and some water, and that's it. I'm one of those intermittent fasters.
Are you? Yeah. Every day?
Yeah, so I go till about noon or 1, depending on how busy I am. And then I sort of have breakfast, lunch, and dinner all condensed into maybe 6 hours or 7, depending.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Do you, I eat in a window the same, 2 o'clock till about 8 or 9 o'clock. Do you take supplements or tinctures or anything like that?
I do in the evening.
Oh.
Yeah.
Is it targeted at sort of sleep and recovery, or is it that's just kind of when you do it?
It's just because it's when I do it, because otherwise I forget. I do take some stuff in the morning, like Restore, Zach Bush's product. But mostly I just do it in the evening, or else I forget to do it. I'm not reliably diligent about that.
If you're like me, you like to do all the hard work in the first half of the day when you're sharp and light on your toes, right?
Yes.
Yeah, me too. So, like I said, we're going to dig into all sorts of the aspect, and I'll, just sort of preface by saying that I've actually tried the NanoVi a couple of times, and I'll tell a little bit about my experience with it. And Rowena, you and I have met before at my flotation center at Float Seattle in Bellevue. But let's start with the basics. And you've been on the Bulletproof podcast, and I've seen you speak in other ways too. And I know that you guys are active in the sort of conference world. But I think that we should start with sort of the basics. So tell us a little bit about what oxidative stress is.
So oxidative stress is coming from the use of oxygen, and they call that the oxygen irony. It's part of that sense of humor the body has, where the one thing you really can't live without for more than a few minutes is also just systematically damaging, because it's like the exhaust from the engine is a pollution in the body, and it's putting out free radicals. And if they accumulate, then it's oxidative stress. And if it's pervasive, then it becomes oxidative stress damage.
And what can oxidative stress an oxidative stress damage lead to?
So basically, the free radical is going to damage anything it can get its hands on. And so it's often proteins. It could be the mitochondria itself, any cell component, the cell membrane, anything that interacts with it. And so the first line of defense for the body is antioxidants, and they stand in the way. Basically, they interrupt that damage. And so good intake of antioxidants is great, but it's not perfect. That's the first line of defense, but there is still damage that occurs. So the second line of defense is to repair the damage after it's happened. And that's where the NanoVi device comes in. So we're not an antioxidant, but we repair the we repair the damage after it's occurred.
Does our body have a natural way to repair oxidative stress?
Absolutely, and it produces the antioxidants itself. And so we supplement, but the antioxidants are coming from within. Then we have the exogenous supplementation. And so all of those processes are naturally occurring all the time. And if we didn't repair, we wouldn't live very long. But one thing that's very interesting that they've shown is, and athletes in particular understand that the more oxygen you consume, the more oxidative stress. So then taking antioxidants or intaking them is very important. And in some cases, they'd supplement, but over-supplement the antioxidants. And another sort of irony of the body is that the free radicals, reactive oxygen species, is actually doing damage generally, but also has a signaling responsibility as a second messenger. It's a molecule that emits a specific energy that triggers repair. So if you do too much on the antioxidant side, you interrupt too much of that process, then your body's not getting the message to repair.
Right.
And a few years ago in Norway, they showed that the athletes that were sort of over-supplemented didn't put on muscle mass the way the other athletes did. So you can actually undermine your agenda if you overdo the antioxidants. So that's not a solution. Basically, you can't just take endless antioxidants and expect that to mitigate all the free radical damage.
Right, because you're overdoing and sort of undermining the body's own biological processes, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So as far as the damage that comes from oxidative stress, I'm thinking about our audience. For the hard charger, type A mover shaker that's taking supplements and taking care of their body and potentially doing a ton of cardio. If they're doing lots of long-term cardio, are they more susceptible to oxidative stress than someone who does zero or a little bit of cardio?
It depends on what they do to mitigate it. They're definitely going to create more. An athlete can create 100 times more oxidative stress, but they might be in the position to repair that very easily. But when you say type A, that makes me think of somebody that's also a more sort of stressed personality, which means they should get in a float tank.
Yeah.
When they're just in overdrive all the time, and we see this all the time, they're high performers, but if they don't take that time out, that calm time, and give their body a chance to catch up, then their damage is going to outweigh the repair. And there are certain athletes or types of people that they just age faster because they're not keeping up, and that's obviously the ongoing thing. If our repair kept up to the damage that was being done, we wouldn't age, because our cells have the ability to recreate themselves perfectly and so on. And so it's just a matter of how fast we age at some point. And then the other side of it is, depending on where the damage is and how it's done, it could ultimately end up as a chronic illness. So certain types of damage might show up as cancers, whereas other types of damage show up as diabetes or respiratory illness and so on. Right.
So as far as that recovery process too, that sort of gets into protein folding, which is an important element of what NanoVi does. Can you tell us again, as accessibly as possible,
Okay.
What protein folding is?
So the proteins are chains of amino acids that are just kind of hanging around there, and they need to fold into specific three-dimensional shapes in order to do their function. And there's just this huge orchestration of activities that can be biophysical or biochemical that trigger these proteins into action. And when they fold into their three-dimensional shape and they have the right structure, only then can they function correctly. So protein folding is critical to proper function, and proper function is critical to everything. All the repair that gets done, all the movement, blink your eye, and that's protein activity. And so they're really critical, and their ability to perform their tasks is all based on them creating the correct shapes and behaving correctly.
And where are these? Are we talking about the proteins like in the mitochondria, in the cells themselves?
Yes. Inside the cell, they're tiny, and we don't know so much about them. There's 30,000 that have been identified, something like that. But they estimate there's about 1 million in there. And then you think of the complexity that all of those guys could interact in ways that are just so complex that it's probably never possible to figure it all out just through kind of an analytical approach to it. And that's why it's there's many drug interventions that go after specific proteins, turn the receptors on or off, replace them if they're missing, and so on. So there's been some great advances through kind of manipulating proteins, but that whole suite of proteins being so huge, and all the potential for unintended consequences because they interact and they play possibly multiple roles that are very hard to track with all these interactions. That's what makes it, really hard to sort out.
And as we age and as we have more stress, that affects the protein folding process, right?
Absolutely. So, I mentioned that they were really small, and you asked about it. There's just tons of them inside the cell, as there are tons of mitochondria. And with the mitochondria, since the oxygen's burned in the mitochondria, a lot of the damage is to the mitochondria itself. And that's a big part of what people notice about our device. It's one of the reasons that Dave Asprey likes it so much, because he's been really focused on mitochondrial function. And if you can repair damage related to the mitochondria, you get better output, better energy, and that's kind of fundamental to the whole system working better. So athletes notice that, and it's great for concentration, which is like running a marathon only with your mind. And so it's that mitochondrial function is also this sort of foundation piece of health.
Right. And before we get into the device and how the device works and what it does, can you tell us a little bit about your background with ENG3? That's ENG3. Can you tell us how you got involved? I mean, how does anyone get involved with longevity devices and health devices? Like, tell us your story a little bit.
Oh, my story is it's a circuitous path. I was in tech. First company was in 1995, and we were doing trade or logistics over the internet. And it was pretty challenging because investors didn't really know what the internet was, and there were very few people who really believed it was something that would be used in commerce. I mean, it was kind of early. And then the next company I did was more specifically related to international trade documentation. The first one was called Passage, and it was around for a while. And but then I started focusing on the trade documentation, and I'd shifted out of that company and was going to take some time off. And I said I would help Han Zheng because in spite of his name, Han Zheng is a big German guy. He's not Chinese, and his German was not as good then as it is now. Let's just say that. And
his English,
with getting the English right and things like that, and then we'd get these phone calls about how helpful it was to people, and it really swept me up because it was a much better purpose than international trade documents. I mean, nobody ever called and said it changed their life. And so I just kind of got caught in that feeling like I was doing something meaningful. And I shifted over. By now, I feel like I know quite a lot about the medical device space. But at that time, I really, I was brand new.
You were drawn by the passion to help people and provide them with something interesting.
Exactly. And it was accidental. I'm embarrassed to say, but I mean, I was helping people with trade documents, so that felt fulfilling, but this was just so much more helpful. And you probably noticed that too with natural stacks and your float projects, where it just really feels good when you have a good outcome.
Yeah. Yeah, it really does. Yeah, it really does. And speaking of the outcome, your guys' website is really comprehensive, and we're going to get into who uses it, uses the device, but pro athletes, hard charging investors, and the site does a really good job to explain sort of the qualitative responses that you get from people. But before we get into that a little bit, can you describe, and we're going to have links galore for this podcast, but can you describe how the NanoVi, that's NanoVi, can you explain how the NanoVi works, what it is, how it looks, how you use it?
Sure. I'm going to just let me walk through from the very beginning, and people can visualize it maybe, but the device has bubbling water to create humidity. And then that humidity is passed through excitation chambers. And what we're doing is mimicking what the body naturally does. So we're mimicking that reactive oxygen species that I mentioned earlier that emits a specific signal that's used to trigger repair and assist the body with protein folding and function. And so we are only mimicking what the body's doing. And all that research is out of cell biology. It's all already done, basically. So our innovation is to find a way to do that artificially and augment the body's processes. And so the air passes through the excitation chamber and you inhale it. But what's happening is all biophysical. There's no biochemistry, which people find confusing because when you inhale something, everybody thinks it's oxygen. But in this case, what we're doing is modifying the water droplets. So the water droplets have a different state. We've shown that in research labs. We've verified that it has these particular properties that are what's needed to ultimately help the protein folding process. So that adjustment to the water it's called ordered water. It's also related to Dr. Pollack's work and others' work in EZ water, exclusion zone water. And it's a different state, and they call it the fourth phase of water because it's not solid, liquid, or gas. It's almost like a gel state. And it's sort of special properties, and it's special to the body. So that is inhaled by the user. You can either use a nasal cannula, which is like an oxygen delivery, or you can breathe it directly from the tube from the device. And once you inhale it, it goes through the mucous membrane out through the watery environment. And it doesn't have to go directly into the lungs. It's going to, as soon as it touches the water, there's all this interconnected water in the system. And it's something like 99% of your body's molecules are water. So there's a lot of water there. But the body's not like a big bag of water. It's more like a cloud. It's like pockets of water because the cells divided up. And so the humidity, which are droplets of water, work very well in that environment. And Dr. Pollack actually wrote a piece about that to explain why the humidity is so important. You can't just drink this water and have it do the same thing, because you need a lot of surface area. And so each of the droplets has that surface area. So that's essentially how the person gets it into their body. We have, there's 3 sizes of device. And just so people know, they're ranging from a little over $5,000 to a little under $14,000. So it is an upfront investment. But it's those, depending on which device you have, then you use it for anywhere from an hour to 15 minutes. And so all of our pro athletes and dentists and doctors will often buy that expensive device because they want the shorter time period. But the other devices are great, and it doesn't have to be done in 15 minutes. That's what the executives get. Just give me the
right. Just give me the best. Give me the best one. The best one you got. And is the different prices for the power of the actual chamber? Is it because of the complexity of the chamber?
Yeah, it's the output of the device, so it is more powerful, and so you're really doubling up that output. So yeah.
So you talked a little bit about some of the athletes that you use and or that use the device. Ben Greenfield has talked a lot about it. I know Matt Boyd, who is a local to me up here in the Northwest, a pitcher for the Detroit Tigers. I gotta imagine that this is also really highly beneficial, not only for endurance athletes. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the experiences that these athletes have had?
Well, one of the things that's really noticeable for them is they use it after training. So if they're running or riding a bike or whatever, and they recover faster. So what might normally take them a few days to recover, they can reduce significantly. And what it means to a performance athlete is they can train harder, because they're just going to go do more of it now that but that's how they develop their skill, and that's how they win races. And so the biggest thing that any trained athlete can notice is that they recover faster. And that includes kind of all aspects, energy levels, soreness, all the aspects of recovery. And we've even had one guy who was one of the Tough Mudder type guys who said he felt cheated afterwards because he wasn't sore, and he knew he'd worked out really hard, and he should feel bad. And it's like, I don't even feel bad. This is,
Yeah, that's funny.
But so that's a really big one, especially for endurance athletes, because they're really doing the long haul. And we have one guy that's done, I might say this wrong, a Deca Ultra triathlon, which is 10 Ironman competitions 10 days in a row. I mean, anyway, that's not me. But that's
not me either.
And he's also done the Arctic race that's largely up above the Arctic Circle and so on. And so for people like that, it's a really big aspect. They're never going to keep up with that kind of damage in 10 days. However, over the time and the months following, it's still going to really help them with regeneration.
And what does this athlete talk about? I mean, have you talked to the athlete directly? Do you know, would they use it right after a race?
As they typically will use it as soon as they can afterwards. Sometimes that's not logistically possible, and in some cases, we've also shown for athletes that if it's used before performance, it reduces lactic acid very significantly. And so for some athletes, if you were, say, a sprinter, it would be pretty easy to find a time to use it and then go do your race. But for others, like the hockey players, they have a bunch of prep and gearing up and all of that, so they couldn't use it right before. But ideally, if you're using it every day, you still get that sort of benefit that you're going to have less lactate in your system. Unfortunately, we don't have the measurements of that. So we have a double-blind, placebo-controlled study showing using it prior to all-out exertion exercise will reduce lactic acid by as much as 17%. And
Wow.
that's a controlled crossover study. But what we don't have is the sort of that follow-on research that would say, well, if you used it 3 hours before, would it have the same effect? And so...
Wow, that's really compelling. I mean, 17% can mean the difference between a top 10 finish and not qualifying for something.
It's really stunning. Now, I just want to remind everybody that all-out exertion test is when the athlete goes to depletion, which is either the doctor stops the test or the athlete does. Has to be supervised, but they go to full exhaustion. And pretty much nobody does that in sports. So you wouldn't expect the same number from what people's normal activities, but it's still very, very dramatic.
Yeah.
I mean, people have not seen anything like that, basically.
Right.
So that's a great aspect of it. And I think that we'll see more and more use for these all kinds of sports where their legs give out, say, if they're running down the field or court or whatever. That lactic acid's a big deal for lots of sports.
Yeah. And what about for non-athletes?
Well, for non-athletes, it's only the people who want to have healthy aging that need it. And so it is repairing the damage and helping people age more gracefully. They may or may not notice more energy. Very often people do, or more clarity and focus. But the biggest thing that most people notice, and actually this relates really well to what you're doing with the flotation tanks, is it balances the autonomic nervous system. It can you can just always show that with heart rate variability testing. And that, as you know, has a huge benefit for all aspects of health. And the most noticeable one for us is better sleep. But it also is noticeable for people's mood, anxiety, and so on when they get that advantage. And that's a really great combination with flotation, because you're just helping that person get out of the sympathetic state, which is the stress mode, and into a parasympathetic state where they're going to be calm and relaxed. And so that's why that type A executive benefits so much from it, because they spend a lot of time in that sympathetic state of the autonomic nervous system.
Right. Well, it's akin to endurance athletes, because for people who are mentally straining day after day, I'm taking a vacation tomorrow because I know that my body needs it. I need a break. I need at least a couple of days to recharge my batteries. And the fact that NanoVi can not only reduce lactic acid and help recovery, but in assistance with the protein folding, it's actually helping, because we know that there's lots of mitochondria in our brain, that it helps with that mental strain. You've seen that time and time again, I assume.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such a good point to make, Sean, because I don't think people realize that you do oxidative damage by tremendous concentration and focus. It's like physical activity in that you're burning a lot of calories. Your brain's a huge user of oxygen. And when you really challenge the brain, which is fantastic, that's how people perform so well and do great things. But then you also need that recovery time, just like you would if you were an athlete. And I think that's where people sort of get behind, and they run their careers and suddenly realize, oh man, I'm just not feeling as good as I should be at 50 or 60 or something.
Yeah. How often do you use it?
I use it almost every day. I don't use it on weekends. This weekend I took it home, but often I just have it at my desk. And so I use it often a couple times a day too. So do a morning session in the evening. And that's another thing. You don't have to do a whole session all at once. You can do more smaller sessions. You can use it a lot. And I should explain that when I talked about the device. I mentioned it's biophysics, but you're not introducing any foreign substance. You're not doing anything that can create problems. So if you use it more, if you use it a lot, it doesn't have the potential for contraindications or any downside to it. So I figure, well, if I'm at my desk anyway, I may as well be using it.
Yeah. Why wouldn't you? Could you potentially be using it like all day? Can you do too much of it?
Yes and no. There are people that use it while they sleep at night, but the only time you can really do too much is when you first start using it. Part of the cell's job is to get rid of the waste products. So, in fact, there was a Nobel Prize in medicine for that in 2016 for the person who did that background research to look at how the cells, identify when something's wrong, recycle what they can, and eliminate the rest of it. And so if people have a lot of that toxicity that's built up, or I don't know, I guess it's not necessarily toxicity, but sort of that waste in the cells, whatever it is, then they should start using the device slowly, because when you get better cellular function, it's going to try to get rid of these waste products. And if your elimination system doesn't keep up, then you can end up with diarrhea, skin rash, headache, these sort of attributes of detoxification. And so then it's important to go more slowly so the system's comfortable until build up the time, and then you're fine.
Yeah, going from I'm not processing effectively enough to I'm doing too well. My body's not used to that. It's not trained for functioning at this high level, and then whoa.
Yeah. And it can, yeah. And usually those people know who they are because they're sensitive to everything. And it's great to get that taken care of. It's just you want to be comfortable. And actually, there's one other thing it's really a good thing, but it's something that I learned quite a bit from Athletic Training Institute. You know those guys?
Yeah.
And if there's old injuries that didn't heal correctly, the body's going to go in, create the inflammatory process that heals it, and then it resolves. And so in athletes with old injuries that weren't properly healed, they may notice that it gets worse before it gets better, but then it will resolve them. And I should mention that, like with mitochondrial function, it's great for inflammation. And we also have double-blind placebo-controlled studies on the inflammatory markers that show higher immune response. And I want to point out, we tend to go down this path of inflammation is bad. And actually, it's good and bad. If it's chronic, it's bad. It's not productive. And it can be traced as underlying many, many diseases and poor performance. But that acute phase of inflammation that's productive is essential. It's what gets rid of the cells that have gone off the rails. It's what protects us against pathogens. It's what gets wounds healed without getting all infected and so on. And so the acute phase of inflammation is very important. And that's what the study showed, that after being overstressed, then that acute inflammation was significantly improved by 10 to 17% when the NanoVi device was used.
Wow.
But I think it's so important for people to kind of separate these types of inflammation.
Yeah.
Because there's a bit of a bandwagon effect of just everything reduces inflammation, and some inflammation is very good, and that's what we see with these athletes, that it can be, uncomfortable as it kicks back in that healing cycle.
Right. What other studies? Are there other double-blind placebo tests that you've done that we'd love to reference? Because I know that our listeners are, they want the data. Are there other things that you can mention?
Well, those guys are expensive, so please understand.
Yeah, they are.
And I should mention, those studies were not done by us; they're independent, and so we can't always get exactly what we want from them in terms of data because we didn't pay for them.
Yeah, that's the right way.
Or publications, we don't control what they publish.
Right.
There was an Olympic Training Center in Vienna that studied double-strand DNA breaks in athletes, but it's not a blinded big study, but it's a very reliable. It doesn't have to be in a way, because they're taking blood samples and they look at the double-strand breaks will fluoresce during this testing process. It's expensive to do, but they can see how much DNA damage there is. And so they did that on a smaller group of athletes, but they showed it pretty substantially reducing the double-strand damage. That was something like 13 to 35% less damage. Again, that's going to depend on the overall condition. What else is in the system? What's the state of the athlete? But there's always this always a significant improvement in by the reduction of damage. And I should also mention that double strand damage is the tricky stuff, because one strand can't replicate off the other strand. So it's really the dangerous stuff. And it's also the stuff that's done through radiation. That's why people take so long to bounce back after some of the therapies that involve radiation.
Interesting.
Yeah.
One thing that you and I chatted before turning the record button on was other sort of differentiating between oxygen therapy, antioxidant therapy. This really does something different than all of those, and really works in tandem. Can you explain how this is different and complementary to like use of a hyperbaric chamber?
Sure. A hyperbaric, actually, it's interesting. Anybody out there who's got a hyperbaric chamber, you really should add the NanoVi because you get much better outcomes. And so that's just for the person using it it's a big advantage. The hyperbarics flooding the system with oxygen, it's even in the plasma, it's really upping the oxygen in the system. If you follow it with a NanoVi session, you can essentially extend that value by getting better utilization of that oxygen. So NanoVi doesn't add anything, but if the cells can utilize it better, then you're going to get a much better outcome. You also get better tolerance of the hyperbaric. And so we've had, I think we have one center that's already purchased 3 or 4 of those, the biggest devices, because it's just a remarkable difference. It's a little handier to use, but it's doing something different. So there's hyperbaric essential for certain acute healing, wound healing, burns, and so on, stroke. I mean, NanoVi will not replace it at all, but it will sort of improve the outcomes and complement it really well. The same with EWOT, exercise with oxygen therapy, is similar. When the two are combined, it's a great combination. And
right, because when you're giving the system more oxygen and you're oxygenating your blood, which is what's happening in a hyperbaric chamber, the NanoVi can work with that oxygen, work with that increase in blood oxygen level to like you said, to help optimize outcomes, right?
Correct. And always when there's more oxygen, there's more oxidation. And so you also want to mitigate that damage as effectively as you can. And so there's a cleanup project, plus there's a utilization aspect of it. That's why they pair so well with any of the oxygen therapies, including concentrated oxygen. You want to mitigate that oxidation.
And oxygen, that's just basically having pure oxygen pumped in through the nose.
Yeah. And people, it might not be pure, but they'll go up, and it's sort of people need more and more of it. If they require oxygen, then they tend to need more and more oxygen. And our device is used often in tandem or cycled with concentrated oxygen, so that they don't have that requirement to need more and more liters of oxygen over time, or to help it at least. Yeah.
If what would a naysayer say? What would they pick apart? What would they try to discredit from? I mean, you can't mess with double-blind placebo studies talking about lactic acid buildup. But what do the critics say, and how do you respond?
Well, I think the biggest area of criticism is related to water. There's a lot of people that are just now kind of coming around to the idea that water has these pretty interesting and unique properties. And if people are not familiar with water research, which was, very much rejected for many years because it was so uncomfortable, it was very disruptive when you tell scientific researchers now suddenly water's not just water. That's kind of not very comfortable. And so it's now sort of indisputable. And so people are coming around to it and more accepting of it. But if you have somebody with that older mindset, then they just like, oh, that's, you can't just influence water and then influence the cellular water, and that it supports the protein folding process. And however, at this point, it's pretty locked down, and we've done the studies on the water itself to prove that it is a different state of water and that we create that state of water. And so we're a patented technology, and it's the only one in the world that can do that.
Yeah. I'd love to talk about my experience with it because, let's make it about me for a minute.
Yeah.
So I've used it both as an adjunct with flotation therapy and also with cryotherapy. And what I've found I've used it a total of 3 times, and in each case, I used it before cryo and before floating. And what I found that after my first exposure, after my first session with it, I felt this sort of like opening up of my chest, and this is getting into sort of like energy and feeling, and I'm very aware of how my body processes, and through meditation and supplementation and floating and exercise and all the things that I do to tinker around and infrared saunas and stuff, I'm pretty aware of when I get a boost of energy. And what I found is that when I first used it, I felt like a dopamine rush a little bit. I felt like I was sitting up straighter. I felt like this sort of sense of well-being, and this maybe 10 or 15% uptick in my energy. And it really lasted for the rest of the day. And my float was supercharged because the way that I use flotation therapy is not only to go in and recover and relax and space out and meditate, but also I use it for problem solving and brainstorming and stuff like that. And what I found is that my mind was moving faster, that my attitude and emotional state was elevated. And when I got out of the float tank, I felt like I really felt like I could go run a marathon. I felt I had an increase in energy, and I don't know if it was because I was breathing in the very barely humid air. Maybe that was just sort of like my own effect of it, but I really enjoyed it. Do you get a lot of people that say that they get just sort of like a quick energy boost from it? Is that common?
It's really common that they get almost like a focus and clarity up front. And that is very common. And sort of related to that, I don't want to go off topic too much, but related to that is when people have low blood oxygen saturation, they will go up. Even with no concentrated oxygen, their saturation will go up because they're getting better utilization, better mitochondrial function, better utilization. And that's what you would be experiencing. Over time, you might not notice it as much, but I love the idea of doing it before float, because then you're already partway down the path to balance the autonomic nervous system. You're going into the tank more ready to really take advantage of the tank. And you mentioned cryo. We have a lot of people that use it usually after cryo. And also, I think for after flotation would make sense, where it's sort of that transition back.
Yeah.
because you probably have people coming out of the tank who are just sitting in a chair going, for a while before they drive.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and much like, cryotherapy has a similar effect where you just feel good. You feel focused and relaxed and this sense of well-being. And I wanted to read just this quick quote from Ben Greenfield. For the past 4 months, I've been breathing air from a special device on my desk, a device called a NanoVi. It gives me a clear head, better workouts, and more focus. But the effect goes deep into the body and actually cause repair. I mean, another one from him. All I know is I feel amazing when I use this thing, whether it's before exercise or just during the day. And those sorts of quotes, like we can learn all the science, we can know what's happening at the cellular level, but the proof is always in the pudding. How does it make you feel, and how does it make you better? And for the listeners of this podcast, it's important to know that it just works. And I think and we'll show pictures, we'll have links, etc., so that people can see what it is. But it's a really simple device. It's a little machine that's like no bigger than a laptop as far as size, and then it has a tube that comes out. There's like this centrifugal water spinner that lights up and looks neat and sci-fi, and then there's a tube that comes up, and it just sort of like lightly whispers this humid air, and you just breathe it in. And so it's as far as usability, it's really accessible to people. It's not too far out there. Yeah.
And we have athletes using it. You put it on a stand beside you on stationary equipment. So in that case, you have to use the cannula, not just the tube. The cannula is the tube, the plastic tubing like the oxygen people wear. And so it's pretty easy to use. And actually, we have a boxer who's the North American champion for the super middleweight. And he has both hyperbaric chamber and the NanoVi. But his point is, it's really easy to use. You can get a session in, you just put it beside you and use it. Whereas, versus going to cryo or hyperbarics and so on. So it is very handy.
Yeah. What do you think? Because I want to make this accessible to people, and obviously, super athletes are getting a positive effect, and endurance athletes. But some of the quotes and reviews that you guys have on the website are really interesting. Can you share with us a story of maybe a dramatic turnaround for sort of a common user, whether it was somebody recovering from a surgery or somebody that was dealing with some illness or disease? Can you give us like an anecdote from a user that our people can connect with?
Yes and no. I'll do my best. We're a FDA Class 1 medical device, and that puts us in a class where we can't make medical claims.
Right. But
one classic one that's really just a matter of well-being and regeneration is a woman that's been through cancer therapy many months earlier and unable to regain energy levels. So we don't do anything with cancer, but that ability to bring her back to life, quite literally, just coming back online in relatively short order. That's only the repair and rejuvenation side of it.
Yeah.
And so that's one good example of that. The others are very measurable. So if a person is suffering from, say, heart disease, they use any of the inflammatory markers or things that are studied as indicators for heart disease. For diabetes, it's blood glucose levels and A1Cs. And blood oxygen levels, all these things that are easily measured are things that people can look for if they were to want to see the difference. And we definitely see those differences, have them reported by doctors and individuals. But I can't really walk through the scenarios very carefully. I mean, I have to be very careful, and I'm afraid that I might not be careful enough. I love talking about athletes.
Yeah, no, you're good. You're good. I know that it's tricky, making claims, and That's why I think the qualitative responses are so important, because people can actually say, like, I did this and I feel really good. I did this and my quality of life improved, you know?
And all of our comments and testimonials are reviewed by a compliance person, and they're all basically watered down. And so, but that's important to have them, you know, be fitting for where we are as a medical device. And so,
yeah. So I'm looking at so where can people you know, if they're not going to buy one, is there a place where they can like search to see if there's one near them?
Yes, there's a locator at our website. The easiest thing is to go to the footer at the bottom of the page, and then you'll see locator. Just click on that, enter your zip code. That's the easiest way to do it. But you're hitting on my kind of personal mission, is that these are very widely available, and with a big device, it can you know, support 100 people a week or more as a regular therapeutic, you know, session. And so it's, if they can be in centers, excuse me, and various locations, then people can access the device. So ideally, they're at a gym where you could, you know, go and use it while you're already at the gym to work out, things like that. So that's sort of our agenda moving forward. We're not really there yet, but there's a decent number of centers depending on the location in the country.
Cool. Well, I it keeps coming up, and I don't remember even how we got connected before I even took over the podcast for Natural Stacks. You and I met, but it keeps coming up, and I know the people at ATI, and when you hear about something and it's all positive, your ears perk up a little bit. And one of the maybe the more interesting cases that I had was when I hosted a Seattle Startup Week event, and I was part of the personal development track for the Seattle Startup Week. And the CEO of Bulletproof Labs, Martin Tobias, who is a champion of the Nano V, he and I got to talking a little bit, and he's an avid cyclist, and he was explaining to me that you know, as the CEO of Bulletproof Labs, he's trying all sorts of stuff. I mean, he's done it all. And if he hasn't, he's planning to. And what I was struck by him is not only his level of fitness, as you know, and for those of you that don't know, Martin is an angel investor and CEO of several startups, including Tipper, and he's just a really highly effective person, and spends time in Seattle and in California. And what he was explaining to me was he was really diligently timing his bike ride up a specific hill that's by his house. And he had been timing it for months and months, and it really wasn't improving. And he was trying all these different things to try to improve his cycling time. And then I think what he said was he just did like 2 sessions with the NanoVi, and his personal best jumped. I think he cut off I don't remember what it was, but he cut off time off of this cycling route that he did every single day. And when a guy like that says, yeah, it's pretty incredible, I really like it, and of course I bought 4, and we're gonna have it here, and you know, it showed it to Dave Asprey, and now he's got 4 of them. Like that was, it really struck me. Does that, I mean, do you know Martin? Have you worked with Martin? You work closely with him?
Yeah. Now it's the other way around though. Dave Asprey had it long before.
Oh,
yeah, before Labs opened, and so Labs added it partly because of for what you said is they slid it in at the last minute when they opened it up. But Dave had been using it for quite a long time before that, and it's definitely something that people can measure. And for example, in his case, he was just using it each day and then rode the bike, so it wasn't as if he was doing the session right before riding. And that's a performance advantage that is pretty significant. But I have to say it all depends, because every person will be a bit different with it, depending on where they are physically, what they're tuned into, what they're measuring. And it's hard to set an expectation for what someone will experience a lot of people get sort of this clarity and energy and focus, and some people don't get that at all. And so it's really, it's a bit tricky that way, because we have one stem cell doctor. It's great with any stem cell treatment. It's perfect complementary.
How so?
Well, the stem cells have to remain viable, right? It's how many of them survive, which is really the big thing. You can spend a lot of money, and if most of them don't make it, they're not going to be very helpful. And so it really supports the process. We have doctors using it, before and after, to pre-treat, get the system ready, and then after to help out. But this one doctor had like a hugely dramatic response where he was having trouble running just 3 miles, and suddenly he could run 8 miles or whatever. It was just crazy response. And then he's telling people about it, and I'm saying, no, you can't set that expectation. Nobody else is going to be like you. But some people, like in his case, I think he was close to some threshold, so the device helped get him up over that threshold. So it was really profound. But other people, it might be just a very gradual increase over time. And it might take weeks that it builds up, and then they kind of take inventory and recognize that they're actually at a very different place, but they didn't even notice it.
Right.
So it's tricky that way.
Yeah, everybody's physiology is different, and they're going to respond differently based on kind of where they're at. For those folks that would try it and maybe don't get that boost of energy, that sort of noticeable response from doing a session, what would be some ways that you could measure afterward? Like if you measured before the NanoVi, and then you did a series of NanoVis, or you introduced it as sort of a daily practice, what might somebody try to measure in their blood or in their respiratory systems to show what impact it's having?
The best thing is if you're ill.
Oh. Because
then you're already taking measurements and you're off, right? If you're perfectly balanced and everything's perfect, it won't show improvement. And so the more the older the person is, or the more off track they already are, the better for showing that result. And then it's whatever is typically being used to measure. So all of the standard measures, especially the inflammatory markers, are really kind of a universal indicator. But anything that's also disease specific are things that should be looked at. And I had one person who had heart disease, and he called and said, I just don't think this is working. And we do have a return policy. We don't want people to have them if they don't, if it doesn't work for them. And I said, well, just, wait and see what your doctor says. Well, he just wasn't tuned into his body. The differences were profound. And when he saw the blood work, then of course he kept the device.
Right.
So that's the other side of it, is that you and the people you interact with largely are probably pretty tuned in and perceptive and noticing, but there's a lot of people that aren't. And I had, well, I can't really say that online, but I've had somebody that was really, a really big difference, and he didn't notice it because it was gradual. But then he looked back on it and said, "Oh yeah, I can, drive my car again, and do these different day-to-day functions that hadn't been possible, but it was a gradual change, so he didn't even notice it."
Yeah,
but
right.
He would have noticed,
Yeah, right. Well, I noticed immediately as soon as the machine turned off. I could tell a difference. How about because you mentioned it just briefly? How about for the elderly population? Are you seeing the people sort of geriatric care providers? Do they use the NanoVi?
The care providers, that's not such a big section of the medical community. It's more the functional medicine or integrative medicine. Dentists and plastic surgeons have a real interest for faster repair, shall we say?
Yeah, sure.
But that, if it's a dramatically faster repair, somebody like an oral surgeon or a plastic surgeon cares a lot about that. And
right.
so that's a really good place for it. And actually, that's one other story I can share. I think legally is a woman that had extensive bone grafts for oral surgery, and she already had a device. She used it a lot the day of, and the next day when she went in, she didn't have bruising, swelling, and pain. And her dentist bought the big device as a result of that.
Wow.
And so those things can be pretty big factors for how people respond. When you're already very healthy and you just want to slow the aging process, you can't expect big changes that are dramatically noticeable. And so for those people, it might be, if they're not really tuned in, then it's more a matter of understanding that it's beneficial, just like understanding a good diet's good for you and doing it, more than, oh, this is, really noticeable to me.
Right.
Most that are more kind of in touch with energy and all of that, like you are very healthy, but you can still notice it. They do pick up on it.
Yeah. What should everybody know? What, as we take this thing home, what should people know about oxidative stress? What should they know about the NanoVi device itself? What can they look forward to? Like, is there like a next generation in the works? Are you guys developing like NanoVi 2 or anything like that? Like, where's this thing going?
We don't really have a NanoVi 2 on the drawing board. Where we're really focused right now is getting it in the hands of more people, and ideally more centers where multiple people can access one device. So that's what we'd really like to work on and focus on. And it can be in any, there's all kinds of people that use it. Like, it's just such a diverse crowd. We have the J2 Porsche racing team using it, and they have to be at their peak when they get in the car. And so it's really interesting, the diversity of it, and we're open to all of that, but really passionate about keeping people healthy or helping people reclaim their health or boosting the performance for those who are interested in really taking it to the next level.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Rowena, thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast.
Hey, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
For additional insights and practical lessons based on this show, go to naturalstacks.com. The Optimal Performance Podcast is a Natural Stacks original. Our executive producers are Dennis Buckley and myself, Sean McCormick. Our producer is Christian Randall. OPP intro music by Odyssey. Additional music provided by That New Jam. A Randy McCrandle production.